So we have concluded the part dealing with the path of individual liberation. This, however, is only the beginning. It is the foundation of everything else that builds upon that. And so it's a very critical part of that, and there is definite overlap between that and the other processes that we will go through. But now it's time to begin with the path of the bodhisattva, or the path of altruistic intention, if you will, the path of altruism. And so we're going to today begin looking at that. So it starts, of course, with altruistic intent. And the idea here is that in the Tibetan tradition, Shakyamuni Buddha actually taught this approach, and it's generally referred to as Mahayana, but we will call it the path of the bodhisattva. And he taught it to more advanced disciples, so not everyone got these teachings according to the tradition. And one of the things is that this Mahayana itself is a little bit self-serving in that it refers to the great vehicle or the greater vehicle. So it's somewhat a self-serving distinction, if you will. But the Buddha himself not only attained enlightenment, but he also shared that with others. And that's really the core principle behind this part of the tradition, the bodhisattva path. The idea of achieving enlightenment not just for ourselves, but to help others as well. So that's the core idea that developed here in terms of this particular path. And so it adds a little bit broader ethical dimension than what we had before. It builds upon that a little bit. The philosophical approach changes slightly and adds some other kinds of things than what we saw in the path of individual liberation. And so it elaborates as well a little bit on wisdom itself and our understanding of wisdom as a part of that. Now, from a Western moral developmental point of view, we go through several stages in the process of moral development. And in the beginning, we look primarily at ourselves. We focus on me. And we can see a parallel here with the development that goes on as we move from the path of individual liberation to the path of the bodhisattva. As we move in our moral development to the next stage, we begin to expand that to others. Small groups at first. It may be your family, it may be peers. That can expand out from that to other individuals, perhaps the tribe or the community, the state, the nation, and rarely, but sometimes, global perspective of all human beings on the planet. So we see this gradual development, and we see something similar here as we move from a focus on ourself and our own liberation to a focus on becoming liberated for all sentient beings. So we can see a parallel in terms of moral development that goes along here. But the core concept in the path of the bodhisattva is bodhicitta. Now, bodhicitta is translated often as the mind of enlightenment, and it's usually divided into two parts, relative and ultimate. Relative is further subdivided into two parts, intention and action. So you could say there are really three parts. There's the intention, the action, and, if you will, the result or the ultimate part. Okay, so three parts to bodhicitta. And the idea is captured in what is known as the bodhisattva vow. So particularly when we talk about ethics in the bodhisattva path, the ethics is focused on the bodhisattva path, the bodhisattva vow. As you will recall, when we did the introduction, the Dalai Lama talks about the three vows for these three paths, and he gives them in a very simple, basic form. So in the path of individual liberation, it is do good or at least do no harm. In the bodhisattva, it is to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay? That's the essence of the bodhisattva vow. And then when we move on to the path of Tantra, then it gets into something called pure view, but we'll get to that later. So oftentimes this is actually incorporated into the refuge vows that we do. For example, I take refuge for the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain enlightenment. So the bodhisattva vow is the second part of that refuge vow. Okay? So it's often incorporated that way. And we also find that oftentimes, not always, but in a lot of cases, there is another set of text, a prayer, that is inserted and follows the refuge vow, and that is the four immeasurables. The four immeasurables also follows along with this idea. And so we say, may all sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. This is a reference to loving kindness. And the technical definition of loving kindness in Buddhism is the wish that all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. Okay? Hence, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. It's the technical definition of loving kindness. Then may they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. Compassion. That's the technical definition of compassion. The wish that all sentient beings not have suffering and the causes of suffering. It's a little bit like the front and the back of your hand. It's like you don't want them to have the bad stuff, and you do want them to have the good stuff. Okay? Loving kindness and compassion. And then, may they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. This refers to joy, or some say sympathetic joy. Now that can refer to the expression of the joy, appreciation for the joy that other people feel when something good happens to them. Or, more specifically, it can refer to the joy of enlightenment itself. So in that case, it becomes the wish that all sentient beings have the joy of enlightenment. Okay? And finally, the fourth verse says, may they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So the basic idea here is we treat everyone the same. Doesn't matter who they are, whether it's a friend or a loved one, or a neutral party, or even an enemy. Everybody is treated with equanimity. We want all of them to achieve enlightenment. So those are some of the things that we look at in terms of the basic idea of bodhicitta in particular, but also the idea behind the bodhisattva vow. In fact, the Dalai Lama often says, my religion is loving kindness, or my religion is compassion. Just as simple and basic as that. And even says, that's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. But of course, in Buddhism, we do go quite a ways beyond that, but that's the basic idea. The great master Shabkar said, one with compassion is kind even when angry. One without compassion kills even as he smiles. For one with compassion, even enemies turn into friends. Without compassion, even friends turn into enemies. Therefore, all of you renunciates and householders cultivate compassion, and you will achieve Buddhahood. Okay. So again, reiterating the importance, that core importance of compassion. In fact, it's really the root of enlightenment, because you will not attain enlightenment without compassion. Okay, so it is a key part of being able to actually become enlightened. So what exactly is a bodhisattva? We're talking about the path of the bodhisattva, and we've talked a little bit about some of these key ideas behind that, but what really is a bodhisattva? Well, the first thing is the idea that we've already mentioned, to take this vow to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's also described in some texts as being of three kinds of bodhisattvas. There is a bodhisattva that is like a king. Now, a king would lead people, be out in front of people, and everybody else follows. So the idea, one of the ways of being a bodhisattva is to lead others to enlightenment. The second one is described as being like a boatman. Now when you're a boatman, you're ferrying people across a river on a boat. And the idea there is that everyone crosses at the same time. So we all achieve enlightenment together. The third one is said to be like a shepherd. Now a shepherd herding a flock of sheep, when you go through a gate, herds the flock of sheep through the gate and then steps through and shuts the gate behind him. And so the idea is, in that case, we're trying to get everyone else to achieve enlightenment, the final complete stage of enlightenment, before we ourselves achieve that stage. Okay? Now you can, of course, see a philosophical problem with that. What if you have 1,000,000 bodhisattvas trying to be the last one through the gate? But let's not get too detailed. It kind of undermines the idea here. So the idea is that a bodhisattva would postpone their own enlightenment in order to help others. And one of the ways that we see this in the tradition is that as we get close to enlightenment and we go through, we'll talk about the 10 bhumis later, different stages of achievement, that we put off the last stage of achieving final enlightenment in order to be reborn again as a human being, in order to then help other human beings and other sentient beings beyond that to achieve enlightenment. And so it is said in the tradition that at the time of death, if you have become a bodhisattva and you set that as your intention, you actually bypass the bardo and you go directly to rebirth. And so you become reborn immediately, not to waste any time at all, to then grow back up and again study, and because of your karma of having achieved that, you immediately achieve high levels of realization and are therefore better prepared to help others in their path to achieving enlightenment. So the first training, which I mentioned a little bit, remember we're talking about the 3 trainings. So the first training is ethics. The second training is meditation, and the third training has to do with wisdom. So today we're talking about the ethics part of this. And so I wanted to give a little bit of a context for this. The main idea in which all of this is developed is a set of teachings called the 6 perfections, or the 6 paramitas. And this becomes the core model for the practice, for the wisdom, and all of the other parts of this. And so the 6 paramitas are first generosity, then ethics, then patience, persistence, either meditation or concentration, use different words there, and wisdom. So those are the 6. And it comes primarily from a text by a monk by the name of Shantideva, who lived in the 8th century, and he wrote a text called A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And so that is really the key text that is used. There are many translations of that available out there, so you can find any number of those to take a look at if you like. And so the idea was, the story behind Shantideva was that he was not exactly the most prolific of monks. In fact, the other monks didn't like him too well. They considered him to be kind of lazy and laid back and really didn't do too much. And so they really wanted to kind of get rid of him. So they decided to offer him a challenge to give a teaching. And so he agreed to give the teaching. And according to the legend, in order to insult him a little bit further, this is not a real Buddhist thing to do, of course, but the idea here was that they would build this throne. So they built him this great throne for him to give these wonderful teachings on that was too high up off of the ground for him to actually climb up on the throne. So they're kind of throwing him a little barb here about these teachings that he's going to give. And so he comes out to give the teachings, and he looks up and sees the throne way up higher than he can reach, and no way to climb up on it. And he reaches out and touches the throne, and it shrinks down to where he can get on it. So he gets on the throne and he asks the gathered monks there, would you like me to teach something I have already taught, or would you like me to teach something new? So they said, well, we would like you to teach something new. So trying to challenge him here. I don't think he really knows anything new, of course. And so he does, and the teaching he gives is the teaching of this text, the Six Perfections. And so that then became the actual written text later on, which has been passed down to us today. So I want to go through in a little bit more detail each of these six perfections to give just a little more background in terms of that and the context for the ethical point of view of the path of the Bodhisattva. So it begins with generosity. And of course, there's many ways that we can be generous to others. And so the essence of this begins with the idea of giving something away or letting go of things. We tend to get attached to things, and so we're a little reluctant sometimes to let go or to give things away that we have. So the basic idea behind this is letting go of those attachments. So we let go of those things in the process of giving them away. And so this then, if we don't do it, actually strengthens our ego clinging to things. And so it becomes a practice that we can do to help us overcome that ego clinging that we tend to have. And so in the words of my perfect teacher, Patrul Rinpoche says, so it gives a list of several different forms of giving. One of them is giving material things, whether they're ordinary or precious, depending on what your means is to be able to give things, or dedicating your life to benefiting others, the basic bodhisattva vow, or giving the Dharma, teaching the Dharma. And whether that's just sharing that with another individual or going through the training and becoming a formal teacher, any of those things count there. And it also includes then giving protection from fear, helping other sentient beings, including non-human sentient beings. Okay? So often live in fear of different things. So that's the basic idea of generosity. The second one then is ethics. And the idea here is avoiding negative actions and engaging in positive actions, just as it was in the path of individual liberation. But it's also for the benefit of others. So we add that phrase at the end, and that's really the most significant difference. The 10 non-virtues to avoid, the 10 virtues to engage in are the same for lay practitioners. They apply also for monks and nuns, but of course they also have the Vinaya, which includes lots of other rules in addition to that. But in essence, they are the same. So we could take the basic ethical proposition of the path of individual liberation, and by adding for the benefit of others, it becomes the ethical essence of the Bodhisattva vow. That is, do good, or at least do no harm for the benefit of others. Okay? Very simple, very basic, and yet that is what it's all about. The third one is patience. We could all use a little bit more patience in our lives, probably. Certainly I know that I can. And we could all benefit in some way from having done that. Whether it's a moment of the flash of anger that may arise in our lives for one reason or another, or the desire for the latest, greatest toy, the latest, greatest kind of a little cell phone, or whatever it might be that you're craving to have. And certainly with the holidays coming up and Christmas reminds me of my childhood. My mother used to tell me, want, want, want. All you do is want. You know, I had lots of craving as a child around Christmas time. So the idea is that we're actually particularly in the West, a very impatient society. We want things and we want it now. And so we need to address that and deal with it for ourselves, but also help others with that. So instead, we need to be more humble about that. And we need to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Treat everyone with loving kindness and compassion. So that's the core of that idea. Now, sometimes I'll have students who will say, Kempo, such and such happened in my meditation. Is that a sign? Am I doing good? Well, sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. It's very easy to become attached even to signs of progress in our meditation. Now, they can be helpful to us, but it's the kind of thing that you only want to do every so often. You don't want to try and do that every time you meditate. Okay? That's how it becomes an attachment. You become attached to how am I doing, how am I doing, how am I doing, and that becomes the focus. So you need to kind of relax a little bit from that and just let it happen. Be patient. Now remember, it took the Buddha 6 years, at least 6 years, after he left the palace and went out, and he studied first with a couple of yogis, and then went out with 5 other people and practiced together for a period of 6 years. So it was more than 6 years before he actually attained enlightenment. Patience. The Mahasiddhas, the great Mahasiddhas, all practiced for at least 12 years, often after having studied and practiced for many years before that. Okay? So at least 12 years for the great Mahasiddhas. Patience. Practice patience. Patrul Rinpoche describes it as, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The next one then is persistence, or some describe it as joyful effort. I like that description. But persistence, joyful effort. So the idea here is that patience and persistence really go together. You need to be patient, but you have to keep at it. You have to put in the work that it takes to get there. So that becomes the practice. But it also applies to many life situations as well. Not just our meditation, but a lot of things in our life. Being patient about them, but keeping at it, and making that joyful effort, if you will, to realize them. So we rarely do our best. So one of the things we often need to do is just kind of reframe our point of view. How we look at the way things are going. If things aren't going so well, we just need to change the way we understand what's happening. Okay, we ran up against some barriers. I need to keep at this. It's going to take a little bit more than what I thought it was going to take. And so we are assured that it does take this effort. As we pointed out, the great yogis took many years for this to happen. And as I tried to start to say, Patrul Rinpoche said that diligence that cannot be stopped is what is required. Diligence that cannot be stopped. So we really have to stay with it. So it's important that we enjoy the effort as well. If it becomes a burden to us, we're not likely to stay with it. And so if we can reframe our attitude, our point of view about it as joyful effort, that really changes what is required. It should be something that has a sense of joy in doing that, in what we accomplish in doing that. And that really helps us in this effort at being persistent. So we want to make the effort because it is possible to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime. So the fifth one is meditation, or some people describe it as concentration. And one level of this is avoiding distractions going on in our lives. It's very easy to just get caught up with this or that or the other thing. If you watch television at all, you ever see how fast the scenes change in television programming, in ads and everything? We used to have 1-minute ads back when I was a kid. We never see 1-minute ads. It's a matter of 15 or 10 seconds, very, very quickly. And it changes about every second. Some of them even faster than that.
I worked that 1/500th of a second is all you need.
500th of a second, okay? But that's what happens, very, very quickly. And it tends to cause us to be very impatient, to lose focus in the process. Okay? Been some research that's been done on multitasking. Turns out people are not very good at multitasking, even as they say they are. Why? They're not able to focus very well. Okay? Because they're trying to pay attention to too many things at the same time. They can't really focus. And the result is they're also not very effective at anything. Well, the first meditation we looked at was called shamatha. Single-pointed calm abiding. Focus. It's all about focus. And the meditation here is exactly the same. Basic shamatha meditation, stay focused. Now we'll also look at some other kinds of meditation, but the basic idea is the same. Stay focused in this part of it. So the ability to concentrate in meditation is called samadhi. And so when we're able to concentrate in that way, then we are able to achieve that kind of samadhi. And so there's lots of different forms, as we will see as we move through the different paths of ways of focusing. But it still all comes back to that as the essence. And then we rest in stillness of body, speech, and mind. Place where we began. We always come back to just rest in stillness of body, speech, and mind. And we get better at it as we go along the way. The next one is wisdom. Wisdom is a little bit harder to describe in an easy way. We looked at wisdom, of course, from the path of individual liberation. We talked about it as the lack of inherent existence of things, whether that is self or other. Those were the two primary meditations that we did for that as we looked at that. But as things moved along, historically speaking, in terms of Buddhism, things changed a little bit and some other ideas were brought in as a part of this. And some say, well, that wasn't part of the original teachings of the Buddha. Some of the traditions say, well, he taught some things to the majority of his disciples, but he also taught other things, including this, to only a few select people. And so it wasn't a broader part of the tradition, but it was part of the tradition going back to Shakyamuni himself, according to these stories. Whether it came into the tradition later or whether it was in fact part of the actual original teachings of the Buddha really doesn't matter. It's whether or not it is helpful to us as individuals to achieve enlightenment. That's the really important thing. So we pay attention to that and be sure that it is consistent with the other things that the Buddha said. And so here there are three kinds of teachings that were brought into the tradition, which we will look at in a little bit more depth. One is Buddha nature. According to the three turnings of the wheel, the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths and so forth. The second turning of the wheel, he taught emptiness. And the third turning of the wheel, he taught Buddha nature. Buddha nature, the technical definition of Buddha nature is luminous emptiness. Okay? Well, what is luminous emptiness? Well, there we can go to the second of these traditions that brought this together, and that was called the Path of the Middle Way, attributed to Nagarjuna, although there were other things that I'm sure influenced him as he influenced other things. And one of the key phrases that he used, and it's all based on the original sutras of the Buddha himself, so it's all tied to that, it's all related to the original sources, was something called the Tetradilemma. This is something that's a little hard to get your head around because the whole idea is to go beyond logic. Okay? Buddhism, for the most part, is very logical. But when it comes to the ultimate, we're talking about something called transcendent wisdom. It transcends logic. Okay? So here's the Tetradilemma. Tetra meaning four parts. Four-part dilemma. It's not a thing, So the logical thing, of course, would be to say, well, that means it's nothing, no thing. It's not nothing or no thing. Well, if it's not a thing and it's not nothing, maybe somehow it's both of them together. Both and. We use that kind of logic a lot of times today. Nope. It's not both either. Well, what possibly could it be if it's not both? Okay, it's not a thing, it's not no thing, it's not both, and here's the real kicker, it's not neither. You've just eliminated every conceivable logical explanation. So the only thing you're left with is just the actual experience of emptiness. Okay? So that's the luminous emptiness. It's not nothing. It's not a total void, but it's not a thing. And it's very easy to conceptualize it. In fact, in the Path of Individual Liberation, when we talked about it as, and we gave a definition of it, lack of inherent existence, that is a concept. Okay? So here the idea was to go beyond the concept. It's not that it's something different, but there's a tendency to grasp when you label it that way. So the idea is to go beyond that and just say, it is. And sometimes we use phrases like suchness or thatness or isness, things like that. But again, the idea is we have to be careful about putting labels on it. It's beyond that. And the third part of the literature, the teachings that came into this part of the tradition, the Bodhisattva's way of life, was the Prajnaparamita literature. The Prajnaparamita literature, the transcendent wisdom literature. And the best known of these is the Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra is often recited as a part of daily practice by monks and nuns and many lay practitioners. And when you look at the Heart Sutra, it goes through, there's some opening and some closing material, but if you get down to the middle part of that, the actual teachings, it goes through a series of statements about it's not this, not that, not something else. Long list of things that it's not. In Western philosophy, we call this via negativia. In other words, by eliminating all of the possibilities, what you're left with, which is beyond any concepts or labels, is just the experience. Okay? And that's the idea behind the Prajnaparamita literature as well, including the Heart Sutra. So we go beyond that. So these all came together, the idea of Buddha nature, and the other piece of Buddha nature, which I did not mention, is that Buddha nature resides in all sentient beings. It's inherent in all sentient beings. The idea is there are two approaches. Either we uncover that, it's like a seed, and we uncover the seed, that allows the seed to ripen to achieve enlightenment. The other approach is we're already fully, currently Buddhas. Again, we're peeling away all of the obscurations to that fact so that we reveal ourselves as the Buddhas that we really are. So two philosophical approaches, different schools of thought about whether it's a seed or fully manifest. Doesn't really matter. In both cases, you do exactly the same thing. You peel away the obscurations in order to get to the point where you really are the fully manifest Buddha. Okay? So those are the basic forms of literature that came into being. Now, as a part of this, then, another development that came into being as a part of the wisdom here are the 6 poisons. The 6 poisons. And the 6 poisons deal with the ethical view or relate to the ethical view of the Bodhisattva. And so we start with this as a way to understand ethical behavior and how we should or should not behave, in addition to the 10 non-virtues to avoid, the 10 virtues to engage in. And the root of all of that is considered to be ignorance. From ignorance, we begin to have attachment and or aversion. From those manifest other kinds of problems, and those are characterized as the 6 poisons. Now actually there's a list of 3 poisons and 4 poisons and 5 poisons and 6, so it depends on which ones you're looking at. They all start to become parts of each other. In fact, there's a list of 51 or 52 of these afflictive emotions, they're called, in the Buddhist tradition, and monks and nuns often memorize that list and so forth. But the idea is basically we start from this fundamental ignorance of the true nature of things, and from that these other things manifest. And so the root of all of this is this ignorance or fundamental ignorance of the true nature of mind. Well, when these begin to happen, we become attached to something. It's one thing to become attached to something once. But if we become attached and then we reinforce that and we reinforce it over and over and over, we develop a habit. The habit, this habituation, becomes the real problem. It reinforces that seed, if you will, that we planted of karma. And that seed becomes stronger and stronger and stronger through the process of habituation. Or if it's a negative kind of thing, an aversion, same kind of thing. Something like anger, let's say, one of the 6 poisons. When anger comes up, we get angry once at a particular thing, it gets easier to become angry again at the same kind of thing. Okay? And easier it becomes a habit. Okay? It's not that we're even angry anymore. It's that we're just in the habit of being angry. Okay? So that's the idea. And so what we have to do is, by doing the practices, break through the habits. Break the habits and replace them with new, healthy kinds of habits. Okay? It's not that we're trying to dissolve all habits necessarily, although some texts would make it appear that we are. But we are trying to get rid of all of those negative kinds of habits that are becoming obscurations to us. And so the 6 poisons are often linked with what are called the 6 realms. Okay? And so we have anger, one of the poisons, is associated with the hell realm. Now the hell realm, we envision beings in the hell realm as either being angry, having just really, really hot anger where they're yelling, screaming, hitting, all of those kind of things. Or you've probably experienced people who'd go the exact opposite. Instead of being all hot and bothered, they become icy, icy cold. Okay? Turn a cold shoulder, if you will. They're angry, but they don't show it externally. Well, isn't it interesting? There are 8 cold hells and 8 hot hells. There are a couple of others, but that hot hell, cold hell relates very closely to these different forms of anger. The next one is greed, these 6 poisons. Greed is associated with the hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts are envisioned as having very, very large stomachs with very itty-bitty, teeny tiny mouths and a throat the size of a needle. So they're really, really hungry, but even when they get something, it's very uncomfortable and difficult to actually eat or drink what that is. So they constantly want more. Greed. Okay? More, more, more. So that's the idea of that one. The third one is with the animal realm. Ignorance, the fundamental one. Now, ignorance in terms of the animal realm relates to the fact that animals often eat other animals. Okay? Birds eat insects, lions eat gazelles, and so forth. Oftentimes, not always, some eat seeds and so forth, but oftentimes they eat other things. Another form of suffering of animals is when they become basically beasts of burden, get it right here, okay, working animals. Okay, so they suffer having to labor for somebody else. So the basic idea is that they're ignorant of what all of this is about. So the ignorance of being in the animal realm. The human realm, we are associated with desire. Not all forms of desire, most specifically with lust. The sexual desire is very strong, because it's strong in other animals as well. But perpetuation of the species is one of those things that we know from evolution is a very strong kind of desire. But it can get in the way of lots of different things. And so all kinds of desire. Now the desire for enlightenment is okay. Okay? So it's not all forms of desire. It's the forms of desire that get in the way of us being able to actually do that. Which then allows us to achieve a state of nirvana, of enlightenment, in which we no longer suffer. So the idea is we're trying to get to where we no longer suffer. So it's whether or not the desire results in some kind of suffering. Okay? Not just whether it's desire or not. The next one we have the demigods or jealous gods. Explains it all in the name. Jealousy. Okay? So the next poison is jealousy. Sometimes we get really jealous and we get angry. So we put two of them together. So that can happen. The jealous gods are said to be jealous of what the next one, the God realm, actually has. In fact, there's a visual image of this tree that is actually, the roots are down in the jealous God realm, and then the trunk goes up into the God realm, and all the fruit is up there. So the jealous gods are jealous because they've got the roots. They're the ones, their realm is providing all the nutrients for this tree, but the gods get all the benefit, the fruit that's growing on the tree up above. Okay. And they're always fighting battles with the gods and so forth because they're jealous of what the gods have. And then finally the God realm. The God realm is associated with pride or arrogance. I am a god. You know? So, and we see that among people. We see all of these 6 poisons among ordinary human sentient beings. Okay? But they are oftentimes associated with these realms. Now, whether the realms actually exist, many lamas will say, well, they exist, but they exist in us. And certainly we can see how that would be the case. So the 6 poisons all then relate back to the basic idea of trying to help sentient beings overcome this. So it is a part of the ethics of the bodhisattva path to help sentient beings in addressing all of these different kinds of causes and conditions, the karma that they have, as well as the afflictive emotions, the mental obscurations, we call the 2 obscurations, afflictive emotions and mental obscurations that get in the way of achieving enlightenment. So the heart of all of this is the bodhisattva vow. So we mentioned this a little before. I talked about the 3 vows. The Dalai Lama explained that in this case, the bodhisattva vow is the one for the path of the bodhisattva. And it comes in different forms. We looked briefly at a couple of those forms. A somewhat more poetic version than what we've looked at is called the 4 great vows. The 4 great vows are, however innumerable beings are, I vow to liberate them. However inexhaustible the delusions are, I vow to extinguish them. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to master them. However incomparable enlightenment is, I vow to maintain it. To attain it. Okay? So the 4 vows there. But there are actually numerous versions of this. In fact, J. Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelugpa order, had a list of 64 different versions of the Bodhisattva vow. So there are lots of these different versions out there. One of these that the Dalai Lama uses a lot, which comes directly from the Bodhisattva's Way of Life of Shantideva, reads this way: as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too abide for the benefit of others. And also, as a part of this, we talked about the 6 paramitas. It starts with generosity and then ethics. Often those two then are really combined. The other ones really are pretty much consistent with what we looked at in the Path of Individual Liberation. Patience, persistence, meditation, wisdom, varies just a little bit, but basically the same. But generosity and the wisdom in terms of, or the ethics in terms of the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of others, the for the benefit of others piece of that, are really the more unique piece of this. So the generosity. So in Shantideva's chapter 3, he gives a list of some things as examples of this. So I want to read these to you. May I regard for those who are protectorless. May I be a guard for those who are protectorless. A guide for those who journey on the road. For those who wish to go across the water, may I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be an isle for those who yearn for landfall, and a lamp for those who long for light. For those who need a resting place, a bed. For those who need a servant, may I be a slave. May I be the wish-fulfilling jewel, the vast plenty, a word of power and the supreme remedy. May I be the trees of miracles, and for every being an abundant cow. Like the great earth and the other elements, enduring as the sky itself endures, for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I be the ground and vessel of their life. Thus, for every single even thing that lives, in number like the boundless reaches of the sky, may I be their sustenance and nourishment until they pass beyond the bounds of suffering. Okay. One of my favorite phrases from Shantideva's text. A nice list of things. So, it's not just things at the level of enlightenment or teaching, it's day-to-day things that we can do for others. Here's a coin. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of doing random acts of kindness with things. This actually comes from there, and it says, "You've made my day. Now pass this on to someone else who's made your day." So very nice idea. Now if I can read the other side here. Today I will commit one random act of kindness, or one random and senseless kindness. Will you?
I love that book. I have it in my bathroom.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of just doing things to actually benefit others in some ordinary way. Here's another one that I like. It comes from a book called The Lady of the Lotus Born, which is about Yeshe Tsogyal, who is Padmasambhava's consort. And so here we're talking about a case where she was coming out of meditation but abiding in a state of meditative equipoise. And she perceived herself as giving all of these things to various beings. So kind of, again, combining generosity and ethics. Very similar to Shantideva. To the hungry, I was heaps of food and all good things, and thus I brought them joy. To the cold and freezing, I was fire and sun warmth, thus their joy. To the poor and needy I was wealth and riches, thus their joy. To the naked I was every kind of raiment, thus their joy. To the childless I was sons and daughters, thus their joy. To those who craved a woman I became a lovely girl, and thus their joy. To those who sought a lover I was a handsome youth, and thus their joy. To those who wanted magic powers, I gave prowess in the 8 great cities, and thus I brought them joy. To the sick, I was their remedy, and thus their joy. To the anguished, I was all their minds desired, and thus was their joy. To those hard-pressed by punishments of kings, I was the loving friend who led them to the land of peace, and I was thus their joy. To those in fear of savage beasts, I was haven, and thus their joy. To those who fell into the depths, I was their drawing out, and thus their joy. To those tormented in fire, I was a quenching stream, and thus their joy. To those in prey of any kind of elements, I was their medicine, and thus their joy. For those who could not see, I was their eyes, and brought them joy. And for the halt and crippled, I was feet, and thus their joy. I was the tongue for those who could not speak, and thus I brought them joy. To those in fear of death, I granted immortality, and thus I was their joy. I led the dying on the path of transcendence and brought them joy. To those who wandered in the bardo state, I was their yidam, bringing them joy. I cooled the burning heat and warmed the cold, those lost in the realms of hell. Whosoever they were tortured, I changed myself to shield them, bringing thus their joy. To those who lingered in the land of hungry ghosts, I was their food and drink, and thus their joy. I was freedom from the stupidity and servitude of those caught in the wordless state of beasts, and thus I brought them joy. To those beings born in savage lands, I turned them from barbarity and brought them joy. I was truce from war and strife for the jealous gods, and was thus their joy. The gods I guarded from their bitter fall, and I was thus their joy. I shielded all from everything that tortured them, and was thus their every joy. Wherever there is space, 5 elements pervade. Wherever 5 elements, the homes of living beings. Wherever living beings, karma and defilements. Wherever is defilement, my compassion also. Wherever is the need of beings, there I am to help them. So, a little long, but a very nice list, again, of ideas of what we can do. So it shows her strong level of commitment to other sentient beings. One other one here, this one comes from a teaching by the Dalai Lama based on the 8 verses for training the mind. Again, this expresses this bodhisattva ideal. With a determination to accomplish the highest welfare for all sentient beings who surpass even a wish-fulfilling jewel, I will learn to hold them supremely dear. Whatever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest among all, and respectfully hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart. In all actions, I will learn to search into my mind, and as soon as an afflictive emotion arises, endangering myself and others, will firmly face and avert it. I will learn to cherish beings of bad nature and those pressed by strong sins and sufferings, as if I had found a precious treasure very difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer the victory to them. When one whom I have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, I will learn to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, I will learn to offer to everyone without exception all help and happiness directly and indirectly, and respectfully take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers. I will learn to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the 8 worldly conceptions, and by understanding all phenomena as like illusions, be released from the bondage of attachment. So again, now those are a little bit more extreme. One of the things that we find in the teachings of the Bodhisattva is that there are some that are suggested that only the highest level Bodhisattvas actually engage in, because they can in fact be harmful to yourself. You recall when we talked about the path of individual liberation and we were looking at ethics, and I said do good or at least do no harm, but there was another piece out there too. Do good, at least do no harm, and keep others from doing harm. But that one is again reserved for those who are at a higher level, because in the process of doing that you can collect negative karma. Unless you are a bodhisattva, in which case you have transcended karma, and so you will not be harmed by any karma from that. So another text that's very nice, we won't go through this, but this one's a bit longer to read, is the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, which goes through and covers kind of the whole set of teachings, but it also has many, many good and useful things, practical things that we can do as bodhisattvas. So these verses really reflect the essence of what we're talking about in terms of a bodhisattva and the path of the bodhisattva, this union of generosity and ethics together. And so we set our intention to benefit others, we act in ways to benefit others, and the result of that will be the wisdom, the form of wisdom that we achieve as a part of this path. So there are two primary actions that we can take. There are lots of ways of dividing this up, of course, but one way is being a role model. And so as we go about doing things in our day, we don't have to tell others what to do to be better. We just role model what we see as the proper conduct for each other. When others see us behaving in that way, they are more likely to behave in that way as well. The other is to act as if we are already, or a part of that is to act as if we are already a Buddha. Okay? So we begin to think of ourselves as a Buddha as we do that. The other one is that we do what we believe in our heart is the best action to actually benefit others. There are some teachings that say, well, we can't really know the karma of another individual. Okay, that's all right, that's true enough. And so maybe they're just burning off some of their own negative karma. And that may, in fact, be the case. But as we'll see when we move on into the next path, there are things that you can do to change that negative karma, to purify that negative karma. So the only way is not necessarily burning it off. We've also seen in many of these verses that I have recited examples of people doing things to help others that needed help. Okay? And so if you said, well, okay, I'm not going to do that because it's their karma and I don't want to mess with their karma, you would be avoiding all of these things that we just went through. So from my point of view, based on these teachings, we should be doing these ordinary things to help others. So when it comes to karma, what about that? Maybe we collect some negative karma from that. Remember, the most important thing about karma is intention. And I just saw a quote from the Dalai Lama just a day or two ago where he was reiterating exactly this same thing. Doesn't matter what you do, if your intention is good, then it's okay in terms of karma. Okay? And we may do something that ultimately hurts somebody else, but if we have genuine good intention in our heart, we're not going to get hurt by negative karma. Okay? So that's the key thing to keep in mind as you go about trying to do good things for other people, other sentient beings. It doesn't have to be people. Okay? Animals, insects, and so forth. Lots of other things that we can do. The other thing that we can do is to teach. Now, I mentioned or hinted at a little bit earlier that we can teach by simply sharing when somebody else asks about that. And we can even frame it in a way that doesn't necessarily have to be a teaching on Buddhism. A lot of the teachings of the Dalai Lama are very, very generic teachings to the public. They do have elements of Buddhism in them, but there are lots of ways. I mean, what's Buddhist about loving kindness and compassion? Okay. Yeah, it is Buddhist, but it's also every other religion and many non-religious perspectives as well. So there's lots of things that we can do to share things with others about what it is that's important to us. We can teach without being a formal teacher. Or we can go that next step and go through the process of learning in order to be able to teach in a formal way as well. All of those are things that we can do. But as Buddhists, we never impose our view on other people. The Buddha was very explicit about the fact that we appreciate and recognize all other forms of approach to trying to understand the true nature of things. Okay? They may have a different view of what the true nature is. That's okay. If it's helpful, if it's beneficial to them, that's okay. At some point, they may come around to seeing the Buddhist point of view. But we're not trying to evangelize people, proselytize to people, any of that kind of thing. So basically, just as in the path of individual liberation, the path of the bodhisattva includes avoiding the 10 non-virtues, engaging in the 10 virtues, and doing good, at least no harm, for the benefit of other sentient beings. So that kind of summarizes the essence of the whole view of ethics from the view of this path.